last time. Now whether that's 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock will depend on availability of rooms, but at the moment I think the provisional plan is that we would set up at 2 o'clock in room 36, and we'll set up 2 arenas and we'll begin debates there, hopefully not too long after 2 o'clock. Certainly the beginning of the tournament will not be later than 3 o'clock. This is 2 weeks from today, right? So, on the day of the tournament you should be arriving with a working robot. There's no, it's not really a day to be still developing the robot. Of course, there will be some facilities available, like these rooms are still scheduled as normal for people to fix their robot. So if problems arise, you know, it's not that you can't fix your robot, but you shouldn't be planning to actually add any additional stuff to the robot on the day. It should be just arrive with a working robot and compete. This is the tournament, or sorry, the tournament arena. This will be sitting up on top of a table. It'll be propped about this high off the table. So it's about like sort of 10 centimeters. So when your robot comes off the edge of the table, which they all do sooner or later, it will take a bit of a tumble, but it won't be falling all the way to the ground. It'll be falling about 10 centimeters onto a hard surface. Even if your robot loses every bout that it's in, it will still have to compete in several bouts. So I would say minimum 3 or 4 that you'll be called up to fight in. If your robot isn't ready to fight when you're called to the table, your opponent will get a walkover victory. A couple of basic priorities that are worth keeping in mind when you're making your final preparations for the robot is if you can't get all the things that you might have dreamed about working in the robot, the main things to focus on are, does your robot move around and does your robot stay on the table? So if your robot moves around and it doesn't fall off the table, so in other words if it detects the white edge and uses that to keep itself on the table, you will probably have a happy and fulfilling day on the day of the tournament. Even if you don't ever see your opponent, you know, you'll eventually bumble into them, maybe you'll get beaten in every bout, but in many cases just by staying on the table your robot will probably win some bouts. So focus on the basics first. If you have other grander plans and you're using rangefinders and stuff like that, that's definitely laudable, and you know, the best robots always do something more intelligent than just staying on the table. But people can get up to mid-table or higher just by staying on the table, even without thinking about the opponent at all. So make sure that's working. If your robot doesn't move, the referee will probably disqualify you. So not moving causes you to lose. If your robot falls off the table, you know, doesn't detect the edge, that causes you to lose the bout as well. So those are the two main things to avoid. The bouts are quite short, but they can be vigorous depending on who your opponent is. Some of the opponents are quite good at finding your robot, and they'll give it a good battering to push it off the table. In a lot of cases, your opponent is going to be just bumbling around, and maybe it'll find you, maybe it won't. But often they can still get tangled up in each other's wheels and stuff like that, so they will get a bit of a working over. So they need to be robust enough to survive a few bouts. After that, you know, if you survived a few bouts and then things start coming off, not the end of the world. You'll do fine. But we do expect everybody to have a working robot on the day, which is responding to some sensors, which is moving around, which is staying on the table. Once you've got that, as I say, anything above that is like a bonus, but like you'll be fine as long as you get that much working. Are there any questions about the tournament, or Gavin, is there anything you can think of that I should clarify?
Yeah, you have to stay within the dimensions, don't you? So when is that determined?
So before the bouts begin, there will be a compliance officer will weigh and measure the dimensions of your robot. So to remind you, at the beginning of each bout, the robots must fit within a 10 by 10 centimeter footprint. So looking down directly from above, your robot must fit within a 10 by 10 square footprint, right? And the weight restriction is 500 grams. There's a couple of things which are slightly different to the race to the wall, which is in the sumo competition, your robot is allowed to expand outside the 10 by 10 footprint after the beginning of the bout. So after the referee has given the signal to begin the bout, the robots are allowed to expand outside those dimensions, but they are not allowed to expand their weight-bearing footprint. So in other words, the part of the robot which is in contact with the ground and bearing the weight of the robot can't be bigger than 10 by 10. So it means you still need to kind of keep the center of gravity basically within that 10 by 10 footprint. The reason that they allowed the robots to expand is in some cases, if you look on YouTube, you'll see examples of competition robots that shoot out flags and stuff like that to try to distract their opponent. they'll be a bit like a sort of a matador trying to like tempt a bull with a rag or something like that. So they use flags to do that kind of thing, and you're allowed to do that. We also allow people to drop down ramps at the front of the robot, provided that they're deployed by the robot itself. So you're not allowed to actually flick it down at the beginning, it has to be deployed by the robot somehow. But you're allowed to drop down a ramp, which is allowed to touch the ground, provided it's just the ramp resting on the ground and that the ramp isn't in any way supporting the weight of the robot or isn't capable of supporting the weight of the robot. So we check that. The other big difference with the race to the wall is in the race to the wall we allow non-compliant robots to compete, but with the penalty that they're ranked below the other robots. In sumo, we can't allow that because it isn't fair to let a non-compliant robot compete against and possibly disrupt the success of a compliant robot. So if your robot is non-compliant, it's possible we might ask you to compete in some, exhibition bouts just to check that your robot is working for assessment purposes, but you won't be allowed to progress in the tournament. So it's absolutely critical that your robot is within the weight and size restrictions if you want to compete in the tournament, which you do. Any other questions? Has you anything else on your mind, Gavin?
No.
Or Jane?
Oh, all good. Glad to see
Is everybody clear? So it's 2 weeks from today. You can get a lot done in 2 weeks, even if your robot's pretty flaky right now, but it could be a busy 2 weeks.
It's not a question, it's more just an idea. Some people are struggling with the chassis.
Yeah.
And it's possible some people have great materials for chassis that they've got too much of. So I don't know if there's any sort of ability for them to
Pool those resources, create a junkyard.
Yeah. Somebody might have got a nice piece of metal or something and they're just using this much and they won't be using the rest.
Well, that's a good idea. Can you think of a way to...
Just hunt around, ask.
Yeah, it'd be nice if there was a kind of notice board facility for that, but we'll have to think about that in the meantime. If you are stuck for materials, do make sure to have a chat with your own tutor to get some ideas, because there's certainly lightweight materials that are easy to work with.